Shavua Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava, Kamma. We are up to Perek Zayin, Mishnah Dalit. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Ranbayev, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana bad Miriam, Sason ben Ryan, Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Avdi ben Chaim lechaim, v'derefua shelemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, betor Shah Chole Israel, and Achlama Merav Benyamin, Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. Mishnah 2 listed several cases where the thief is obligated to make the fourfold or fivefold payment. Our Mishnah cites related cases in which he is not obligated to pay. Ganav al pishnaim, if someone stole an ox or a sheep according to two witnesses, v'tavach umachar al pi ed echad or al pi atzmo, and he slaughtered or sold the animal according to only one witness or according to himself, meaning he admitted that he slaughtered or sold it. Mishalem tashlumei chefel, he makes the double payment because two witnesses testified that he stole the animal. But he does not make the fourfold or fivefold payment because the testimony of a single witness or his own admission is not enough to obligate him to pay. Although someone who admits that he owes money is usually obligated to pay, that rule applies only to regular monetary obligations like debts, damages, and the like, and not to fines such as the fourfold and fivefold payments. One who admits that he owes a fine does not have to pay it. Ganav v'tavach b'Shabbat, if someone stole an ox or a sheep and then slaughtered it on Shabbat. So here we apply the rule that a person who became subject to the death penalty or other severe punishment and a lighter punishment at the same time receives only the severe punishment. Slaughtering an animal is one of the 39 melachot activities that are forbidden on Shabbat and which are punishable by death. Therefore, if a thief slaughters a stolen animal on Shabbat, he becomes liable only to the death penalty and not to the fourfold or fivefold payment. Here, he is exempt even if he does not actually receive the death penalty. For example, he did this activity, this melachan Shabbat, without knowing that it is forbidden, because doing a sin that can be punished with a severe penalty is enough to exempt him from a monetary obligation incurred at the same time. Ganav v'tarach l'avodah zarah, or he stole an ox or a sheep and slaughtered it for idolatry. Idol worship carries a death penalty. Accordingly, if a thief slaughters the stolen animal as a sacrifice to an idol, which makes him liable to the death penalty, he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. Ganav mishel aviv umet aviv akach tavach umachar, or he stole an ox or a sheep from his father, then his father died, and afterward he slaughtered or sold it, so the thief and his brothers inherited the stolen animal upon their father's death. Therefore, when he slaughtered the animal, the act of slaughter was not entirely prohibited, since he then owned part of the animal. A biblical source teaches that the fourfold or fivefold payment is imposed only when the slaughter or sale of the animal is entirely prohibited, and not in a case such as this where part of the animal belongs to the thief. He is therefore exempt from paying anything, even the shares of his brothers. Ganav v'ikdish v'akach tavach umachar, or he stole an ox or a sheep and consecrated it. Therefore, he designated the animal as an offering. Although consecration can also mean giving an item to the temple treasury, that is not its meaning here, because consecration of that type is because consecration of that type is considered a sale. Now, it's normally impossible for a thief to consecrate stolen property since it's not his. The Mishnah, though, refers to a situation where he consecrated the animal after the original owner had despaired of getting it back, in which case the consecration does take effect. So again, he stole an ox or a sheep, consecrated it, meaning he designated the animal as an offering, and afterward he slaughtered or sold it. Now, when he slaughtered the animal, it was already consecrated. It is derived from the Torah that if a thief slaughtered or sold an animal that he consecrated, he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. Mishalem tashlumei chefet, in all these cases, he makes the double payment. Ve'eno mishalem tashlumei arba v'chamisha, but he does not make the fourfold or fivefold payment. Now, having spoken about a thief who stole an animal and consecrated it, the Mishnah deals with a thief who stole an animal that had already been consecrated, meaning he stole an offering from someone else. The sages rule in another tractate that one who steals an offering is exempt from the fourfold and fivefold payments. The ruling of the sages is found in tractate Bava Mitzvah, chapter 4, Mishnah 9. The Torah states in the book of Shemot, chapter 22, verse 6, V'gunav mi bet ha'ish, and it was stolen from the house of the man, which teaches that one who steals an offering or other consecrated property, hekdesh, is exempt from the double payment because he did not steal from the house of the man, an ordinary Jew, but rather from the house of hekdesh. And if he slaughters or sells it, he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. However, he must return the animal itself, or if it is unavailable, pay its value. He is exempt only from the fine. Our Mishnah cites a different view. Rabbi Shimon says, If he stole and slaughtered a consecrated animal for which the owner is responsible, meaning the owner would have to replace it with another animal if it is lost. If someone says, I accept upon myself to bring an offering, and designates an animal as his offering, and the animal then becomes unavailable, for example, it dies or is stolen, he must designate and bring another in its place. Since he said, I accept upon myself, he accepted a general obligation upon himself, which is not limited to any particular animal. Therefore, if a designated animal is lost, he must replace it. Similarly, if someone is obligated by the Torah to bring an offering, for example, he committed a sin for which he must bring a sin offering, and he designated an animal for that purpose and then lost it, he must designate another one. So in this case, where he has to replace the animal with another animal if it's lost, Mishalem Tashlumei Arba v'chamisha, he makes the fourfold or fivefold payment to the owner. Because the owner is responsible for the animal, it is still his property and he must therefore pay for it. Since the animal still belongs to the original owner to some degree, one who steals it is considered to be stealing from the house of man, in which case he must make the fourfold or fivefold payment. If he did not slaughter or sell it, he is liable to a double payment. Now the Mishnah must be referring to an act of slaughter that makes the offering permitted to be eaten, because Rabbi Shimon holds that the thief would not be liable to the fine otherwise. One possibility is that if it was slaughtered in the temple court like any other offering. Another possibility is that it developed a blemish, in which case it may be slaughtered outside the courtyard. However, if it did not become blemished and he slaughtered it outside the courtyard, the shechita would not count according to Rabbi Shimon, because such an animal may not be eaten. Rabbi Shimon agrees that in the Mishnah's previous case, where the thief stole an ordinary animal and consecrated himself before he slaughtered or sold it, he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. Rabbi Shimon requires the thief to pay only if he stole an animal that had already been consecrated. However, if he stole and slaughtered a consecrated animal for which the owner is not responsible, meaning the owner would not have to replace it if it is lost, he set aside an animal and said, this is an offering. If the animal then becomes unavailable, he does not have to replace it because he designated only that animal as an offering and did not accept the general obligation upon himself to bring any animal. Patur is exempt from payment. Since this animal did not belong to its original owner at all when it was stolen, the thief does not have to pay. Here, Rabbi Shimon agrees with the sages. Narav Desels Venachak Rabbi Shimon, the halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the halacha follows the opinion of the sages. And that is then of Mishnah Dalet. Mishnah Hay lists more cases where the thief is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. If he sold the animal except for 1/100th of it, meaning he sold 99% of the animal and kept 1% for himself, is derived from the Torah that a thief does not become obligated to make the fourfold or fivefold payment unless he sells all the parts of the animal that became permitted to be eaten through slaughter. Therefore, if he keeps any edible part of the animal for himself, he is exempt from these payments, as the Mishnah will state. However, if he keeps an inedible part, such as its wool or a horn, he does have to pay. So again, if he sold the animal except for 1/100th of it, so he sold 99% of the animal and kept 1% for himself, or if he had part ownership of it before he stole it, since part of the animal belongs to him, he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment, like we learned earlier in Mishnah 4. These payments are required only if the thief slaughter or sale of the animal was completely prohibited, and not in a case like this, where part of the animal was always his. Hashochet v'nitabela biyador, if he slaughtered it, but it became a nevela in his hand, meaning he slaughtered the animal incorrectly. For example, he used the knife that is flawed, or he paused in the middle of the shechita, which makes the shechita invalid. As Rashi explains in Chulin, page 17a, now nevela is the term for an animal that died without proper shechita. So in this case, he made it a nevela, which may not be eaten. Hanochel v'hamaker, or if he slit the pipes lengthwise or tore the pipes out, which are invalid forms of slaughtering. Proper slaughtering requires sliding a sharp knife across the trachea of the windpipe and the esophagus, the food pipe, until most of each pipe is cut. Cutting through the pipes lengthwise or ripping them out is not a valid slaughter. Now the sages in Mishnah 2 rule that the thief must make the fourfold or fivefold payment, even if his slaughter does not permit the meat to be eaten. However, that is true only where the slaughter was done properly and the animal was prohibited for some other reason. For example, it was a trefa. If the slaughter itself was invalid, the sages agree that the thief does not need to pay. In all these cases, he makes the double payment for the theft, but does not make the fourfold or fivefold payment for slaughtering or selling the animal. The second part of the Mishnah discusses kinyan. When one buys something, he does not acquire it until he performs a kinyan, an act of acquisition with it. Similarly, if one takes something from another person without permission, he has not committed theft. which makes him subject to the obligations of a thief until he performs a kinyan. Therefore, if one stole an ox or a sheep and then slaughtered or sold it before he performed the kinyan, he is not obligated to make the fourfold or fivefold payment. This Mishnah deals with the fourfold and fivefold payments. The principle and double payment kefil are discussed in the next Mishnah. There are several types of kinyanim, acts of acquisition, that can be performed with an animal. One is the simple act of pulling the animal, which is called mishicha, pulling. However, in order to be effective, mishicha must be done outside the property of the owner. The Mishnah teaches how these rules relate to the fourfold and fivefold payments. If he stole the animal when it was inside the owner's property and slaughtered or sold it outside the owner's property. So he found the animal on the owner's property, pulled it outside, and then sold or slaughtered it. He became subject to the laws of a thief when it left the owner's property, since that was when the kinyan of pulling mishicha took effect. Mishalem tashlumei arba v'chamisha, he makes the fourfold or fivefold payment. I'm sorry, we skipped the case. Or sheganav chutz me'ershutam v'tavach u'machar b'ershutam, or if he stole the animal when it was outside the owner's property and slaughtered or sold it inside the owner's property. Or sheganav v'tavach u'machar chutz me'ershutam, or if he stole the animal and slaughtered or sold it outside the owner's property. So in these last two cases, the theft occurred as soon as he pulled the animal, since it was already outside the owner's domain. Mishalem tashlumei arba v'chamisha, he makes the fourfold or fivefold payment. Since in all these cases, he must have pulled the animal at least a short distance when it was already outside the owner's property, he performed a valid act of mishicha, pulling, which makes him subject to the obligations of a thief, including the fourfold and fivefold payments. But if he stole the animal and slaughtered or sold it in the owner's property, in which case it remained inside the owner's premises at all the time, Paturi is exempt. Since the animal did not leave the owner's property, he did not perform a valid act of mishicha, of pulling. Therefore, he is not liable for stealing the animal. However, he must compensate the owner for any damage he did to it. And that is an abotai today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.